It's the Panthers until it isn't.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, November 18th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at L_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. You could also start following myself on Blue Sky at Monoman12 and the show account at LOFLA Panthers, no underscore there for Blue Sky. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. So, Florida Panther fans, grateful to be back here on the show and quickly getting you guys an episode right as the week begins, because this is still very fresh in my mind for what we saw and witnessed on Saturday night with the Florida Panthers defeating the Winnipeg Jets by a final score of 5-0, a shutout for the Florida Panthers in Sunrise, Florida. And here to discuss that game and more in regarding to the Florida Panthers and snapping their quick skid for them after losing twice to the New Jersey Devils. You probably heard him before. He is the host of the Y Hockey podcast and one of the co-hosts of the Pucks and Palms podcast. Matt Lichtenstadter is here on the show, making his Locked On Panthers debut. Matt, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me, and pretty good name pronunciation, actually.
Yeah, I'm glad I also did it on the first try in our pre-production meeting here. So glad to have gotten that down for the name. But let's discuss more about this game for the Florida Panthers and the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, this was a game obviously on Hockey Night in Canada, so a lot of eyeballs were on this one. But I mean, this one for the Panthers, it was really from the first shift of how they were able to just disrupt the Winnipeg Jets on breaking out of their zone. I mean, Barkov discussed after the game how this was one of their best performances going back to the Ranger game that he missed. And I'll add the Nashville Predators game, the home game that the Panthers had for them right when they came back from Finland. So the fact that the Panthers can travel to different places overseas, come back, have a little bit of a slide, but then still come back and find and recollect themselves against a team like the Winnipeg Jets leading the league. I mean, it's just incredibly impressive how they continue to do this.
It's impressive mostly to me because I find that when teams talk about culture, it's a nebulous term. It can mean anything you want it to mean. It's through the looking glass. But for the Panthers, culture is a standard that they have set for themselves. And their games against New Jersey weren't really up to their standards. The Tuesday game was fine. Bounces go here and there. They hit like 5 posts, so maybe that game goes another way. Thursday was not up to their standards. And then you get to this game against a really good Jets team, but one that had just lost its first game in like 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks. And those kinds of games can be tough for a team when you're coming off a big winning streak, as we saw with the Panthers. And then the first loss usually can snowball a little bit. We've seen that with Panther streaks in the past. And they didn't give the Jets any room to breathe. And when they have games that are not up to their standard, like with Minnesota earlier in the year, they tend to respond with games that are well and truly at or above their standard. And that's what we saw with this game. And that's what culture is. They hold themselves to that accountability and that standard because that's what they know they have to do in order to win. And plenty of teams can talk about having winning cultures, but that's what that actually looks like. And the domination of it is impressive because you're playing against a really good team. The domination of it is impressive because you're coming off of a bad performance and you can immediately turn that around with a win. But the domination of it comes just to remind everyone that, yeah, no, they're still the defending champs, and they're the defending champs until they aren't. And you have to remind yourself sometimes of just how good this team is, because I don't think they've been anywhere near their peak best yet this season. We've seen it in fits and spurts, but this team's still pretty good, and it shows that when they put it all together, they can still beat anybody and they can still destroy anybody.
Yeah, and I think about just how they bounce back on different occasions. I mean, doing it in their first game against Buffalo on the road game, and then having that back to back in Boston and Columbus there. So that is another comparison about just bad games for the Panthers, and then just responding. But also, I mean, the leaders for the Panthers. I mean, Sergei Bobrovsky getting a shutout, but how well the Panthers were protecting the net front. Aleksander Barkov and Sam Reinhart each with 3 points. Aleksander Barkov getting a shorthanded goal there, and even talking about it on the bench with Evan Rodriguez after the goal, and just all the X's and O's about the positioning for them, and also Mackie Samoskevich setting the tone for putting a hit on Josh Morrissey and then finishing the rush on the redirection there with that Gustav Forsling set him up, but also Uvis Belinskis with the hit, and also going to the locker room and just missing a shift, coming back, and also for him, the growth of so many different young players for the Panthers, and just helping them contribute, and also two Winnipeg former Jets defensemen, Nate Schmidt getting a goal at a big in a big spot to extend the lead, and also that Kulikov goal on the 4-on-4, and also other guys stepping up for the Panthers and stepping up for each other. I mean, Mark Scheifele was starting to get frustrated with everything. Got a hit on Uvis, got a hit on Forsling, and then Aaron Ekblad steps into to fight Mark Scheifele. It's funny because I actually looked up Aaron Ekblad's last fight. The last one was May 11th of 2022 in Game 5 of the first round against the Washington Capitals at the very end against Anthony Mantha. And then the frustration boiling over with misconducts galore on towards the end, and just I know Garrett Rank wasn't the official for this one, as we saw in the Ottawa game last year in one of them, but just continuing the frustration for opponents and just continuing to get in the heads of the opposition.
I want to go back to the Samoskevich point, because I posted it on Blue Sky yesterday, which very fun place to be. It's not nearly as negative sometimes. You might want to try it out during a game night in the coming weeks. You'll find that you'll enjoy it. It's still small but mighty. And the Samoskevich point I made is that that's the kind of play that you wondered whether you would see it. And when he was getting scratched and playing on the fourth line, which he still is, I was wondering if he's going to make those kinds of plays. Like, that's what Panthers hockey is supposed to look like. You set up a scoring chance, whether it goes in or not, because of a good forecheck, separating the man from the puck, being aggressive in those spots. And it's even better that he got rewarded with a goal, because that's the kind of play that you need to see from him going forward, no matter where he is in the lineup. I personally don't like it when someone like that is playing on the fourth line, even though I understand the logic. But what's important is to get the consistency in his game, because I don't doubt that the team in front of him is going to play pretty consistent most of the year. They're going to have their off nights, but the consistency has long been established. We know what this team is. And that Samoskevich moment is the moment where I wonder if the light bulb goes off. You know, because he had one against the Rangers where he makes a bad play along the boards and that leads to a goal. And I wondered at that point, are we going to see some trouble ahead? Not necessarily that he's not going to be able to live up to what the expectations are, but is this going to be a start of a negative cycle, perhaps, where he's playing lower down the lineup? He got moved down in that game, and then he scores against the Islanders. Then I wondered, okay, he's getting scratched, even though he's playing well. And I'll trust Paul Maurice on that. He knows way more about hockey than I'll ever know. But I wondered about that. And then to see him make the play in this game, in a big game, and to do that effectively is going to be hopefully a sign that he's starting to see the game slow down for him. And he's starting to make the plays that you need to make if you're going to stick in this lineup. And if you're going to make plays in the really big games down the stretch where they're going to need them.
Yeah, and I was listening to one of the national shows, Daily Face Off, and they were talking about how Matvei Michkov, when he was getting scratched, how much you could learn from the press box because of game speed versus looking at things, how plays develop and everything. And of course, going up against a board battle against Adam Fox to set up the goal from Lafreniere, it's going to be hard to beat him there. But obviously, the angles for Mackie Samoskevich, that's a learning opportunity for him there. So thankfully for him, he was able to just respond very quickly after moving down the lineup. And hey, Patrick Giles and Uvis Balinskis still being part of the ice on that first goal, something that he'll remember for the rest of his life. And also 3 goals for Mackie Samoskevich in 3 different situations, 1 on the road, 1 in neutral site, and 1 at home. As far as that, and also for one thing, Neil Pionk did get fined $5,000 after clipping Jesper Boquist, so that's another bit of news of regarding everything that happened there. Thankfully, Jesper Boquist is okay after taking that to the knee, but also just an incredible atmosphere, at least watching it from the television, on overrated chance for Connor Hellebuyck. Bobby's better. And just understanding the assignment and just knowing about everything with the NHL landscape, with how well Winnipeg is doing, and also how Florida has responded. Even though I'm not really a big face-offs guy when it comes to statistics, Panthers were losing the face-offs 10-2, and they were still getting pucks in deep. And then that number was starting to get better, and then just turning it on. It's so crazy how even when they're losing that part of the matchup, they still can roll the 4 lines.
I worry about trying to outduel Jets fans with chants, because I don't know if you remember what they said about Jake Ottinger.
Yes.
So like, you're not going to out chant Jets fans. Probably they have that down pat. The Panthers fans have had a couple good moments. You know, that's funny. It was enjoyable, but the Jets fans are probably still going to top you. So you got to be very careful there. Although, again, they don't have the cup. They don't even have a cup final appearance. You know, we'll see what they create. It's a Tuesday night game in November. It's not going to be the same as a Saturday afternoon game, but you got to be careful with how you poke the bear there, so to speak. Those Jets fans got experience.
No doubt. And we are actually going to transition into segment number 2, where we are going to discuss more about the home and home shift, where the Panthers will be traveling to Winnipeg for the second game of this season series. We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. And you can now win 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action in sports in 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. And Prize Picks puts members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. So when my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And you think that next week that Tyreek Hill will get over 83.5 yards, Christian McCaffrey, if he'll run for more than 75.5, Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which players aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports options into real money all season long on Prize Picks. So download the app and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $50 off instantly after you play your first lineup. And you can do that all on Prize Picks. Run your game. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. Still talking about the Florida Panthers' 5-0 win over the Winnipeg Jets in the first of 2 in this quick home and home. And then the season series is over between these 2. But also, Matt, Panthers have 5 shorthanded goals. 2 more than the next best teams, which are the New Jersey Devils and the New York Islanders, which New Jersey got 1 of them on that power play opportunity for the Panthers at the end of their Thursday game. And they had 8 all of last season. So it's all crazy, 18 games through. And the fact that the Panthers are already more than half the total from the year before. And also, I also crazy to think that it's Paul Maurice's first win against the Winnipeg Jets in his tenure as a coach. And what he said after the game was just not only getting the win, but the fact that they didn't play terribly against them. And now in this road trip coming up in the Paul Maurice era for the Florida Panthers, not a single win in Chicago, not a single win in Winnipeg for them. And I remember that first Winnipeg game; they were battered, bruised. Half the lineup was missing in that one, so that was at the end of the road trip. And I remember that was a scheduled loss. That felt like a scheduled loss even before the puck dropped there. But I mean, also the difference between changing venues versus what they recently got in New Jersey, they have an opportunity to, maybe even more of a fire lit under them as far as the Panthers, because the crowd being against you, but also reviewing tape and everything, because there's not much changes. You don't have to go through a possible trade deadline or multiple injuries. So things are a little consistent when you know possibly how to game plan for the opposition.
It's interesting because what is this now? They just had one with the Devils, so that was one of those COVID year. You're playing a team 2 times in a row at home. Then you've got this home and home. You've got a home and home with Carolina at the end of the month. You've got a home and home with Tampa right before Christmas. And actually, they have technically a home and home with Anaheim in January. So they get a lot of these. Weird schedule. And you also have to include home and home. You also have to include technically against Dallas. That's technically a home and home, even if it wasn't. When I look at these situations for the Panthers, it's not only a good, I guess, facsimile of what you're going to get in the playoffs, where you're playing these teams constantly and you're going to be constantly adjusting what you're doing. I think it's also just getting yourself in the mindset of these are going to be big games, and not just the big games every night, but it's harder to get up for it in certain situations. If you're going from, okay, you got a Tuesday night game in Seattle, you've got a Thursday night game in Calgary. It's not actually working like that, but you know what I mean. And if you get these home and homes, you instantly see the fire start to boil over. And we saw it with the Devils. They got sick of each other. And now with the Jets, I mean, that's going to carry over into the game tomorrow after all of the chaos at the end of the game on Saturday and the misconducts, the hit from Pionk that wasn't very good. That kind of is going to boil over, and it's going to make the second game intense. And one of the things I pointed out on both the shows I do is that if the Panthers have a big game, one they need to get up for, like, you're pretty confident they're going to get up for it. Okay, Saturday night in Buffalo, when the Sabres are desperate, they don't have their 2 best players, you'll understand it. But then Boston, yeah, they're ready for that. The following night in Columbus with everything that was going on, they're ready for that. Rangers on any situation they're playing the Rangers, they're up for that. The Dallas games, they were up for that. These were not one of the situations where I expect the Panthers to have one of those, as Paul Maurice said preseason, we're going to lose on Tuesday night in November against some Western Conference team we shouldn't lose to. Like, be prepared if they lose to Chicago. It's like, okay, You got to understand they're going to do that sometimes. But if it's a big game, they're going to get up for it. And I think for Paul Maurice returning to Winnipeg, I don't know if anybody actually asked him if this was a money on the board game. Probably wasn't, because it's happened 4 times already. He still wanted to beat them. And I think he's going to be energized for that game. And the Jets, after, getting it handed to them in 2 games in Florida, they're going to want to respond in a pretty This is the first time I think they lost consecutive regular season games since April last year. It's incredible, the start they've had. But for me, it's also just about finding, again, the consistency in their game to do the things that they have to do when it matters most. And as long as you don't see that go away for an extended period of time, then they're probably going to be okay. And they had it go away a little bit in some games, but then they got it back. And they've been winning some games this season when they haven't played anywhere near what their level is. I'm looking at some of their advanced metrics, and they're not possession monsters. Like, even the first year Paul Maurice teams were really good possession-wise and just had the worst finishing and shooting luck and goaltending luck that you can have. This year's team is actually, according to, go look at Jack Frazier, Jay Fresh's numbers. He posts all of them every week. They're the best finishing team right now in hockey. Most of that's Sam Reinhart. So they're playing a little bit above what their actual play is probably suggesting. But that being said, when I know that they're going to be fine is when I see them in these games where the stakes are clearly there. it's very obvious that they're going to be up for it, and they can go out and they can prove that they can do this. And in none of those games this year have I seen the Panthers really lay an egg. Like, I guess the Devils is the only one close to that, but it's not the same as, oh, you're playing Boston again, you're playing the Rangers, you got the Finland games. They're going to have some bigger games coming up. Toronto is going to be one they'll be up for. They'll probably be up for Carolina. Like, these are the kind of games that, and then in December, Edmonton, they're going to be absolutely locked in for that. So as long as they still look like that in the games where it really matters, then the games in which they have lesser performances doesn't worry me that much.
Yeah, and I remember earlier in the year, I know numbers could be a little skewed in the at the beginning parts of the season, but I remember I was seeing like Corsi for percentage of 53, but their shots for, shots against were almost at 50%, and now it's now even gotten a little higher now that pucks are getting more on net for them, so they're also getting their. It really also comes down to just how they're getting to the net front with how they win their board battles, and then continue to get their second chance opportunities, as we saw, especially on the Evan Rodriguez goal on Saturday. So that's really how the numbers are really starting to really reflect more of how possession dominant they can be, even though it's not necessarily number one. I mean, expected goals against. I mean, Jay Fresh posted this morning. They're in the top third, and also shots against. They're also in the top third of least amount. So with Sergei Bobrovsky and just the amount of goals that he might allow, and the save percentage might not always tell the whole story for him. That's another thing that it's continuing that whole topic from the postseason last year. Oh, the save percentage isn't the best, but they're doing well to protect them. But that's actually a good opportunity for us to shift over to segment number 3, where we're going to continue the conversation on Sergei Bobrovsky and also discuss more of everything in relation to the Florida Panthers, and also for just the continuing talking about how it is the Panthers until it isn't. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 300 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about the Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Third and final segment here on this Monday, November 18th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday, continuing the conversation on the Florida Panthers' 5-0 shutout, and just continuing the conversation about more of their foundation, as we really truly saw a performance that really set a message to the NHL world on a game that was truly highlighted and once again had a lot of eyeballs on. And Sergei Bobrovsky, 45th, shutout of his career. And like I said in the last segment, save percentage doesn't always tell the story. The league, it's funny because now, and where scoring is up for the NHL, sometimes even looking at a 900 save percentage, sometimes you're thinking, okay, that's exceptional for a lot of goalies on depending on what team you're also talking about. But the fact that we haven't seen Sergei Bobrovsky at their best, and they're still getting they're still having structurally sound, and also complementing that with the someone who's currently tied with the league in goals in Sam Reinhart, which, crazy enough, we always tend to see a shutout for Sergei Bobrovsky in a Panthers uniform in the month of November. I can recall 2 against the Red Wings in 2 different years, November 2nd to be exact on both of those years. And usually it's for based on Hockey Reference, his second best month in his career. His worst is actually October, which is great to get that out of the way. March is his best month. But also, once again, getting this out of the way for Sergei Bobrovsky, even though the save percentage doesn't necessarily tell the story, but also doing it with the Hockey Fights cancer mask that he's sporting all month. So your thoughts on Bobrovsky?
Well, we talked about Jack Fraser's numbers before, and he's actually in the bottom 10 in goals saved above expected at the moment, which it can happen with him. And he's had some games where he's not played particularly well. I think the story with him, as we've always talked about, is he's never going to blow you away necessarily with the consistency of, wow, he's just going to stop everything tonight. He'll have the highlight reel save, as you remember, probably from the early days when he would make an incredible save and then give up a tough one like 3 shots later. And then the Bobrovsky we're seeing now is the one who's always good enough to make the next save. When he has to make the next save in the big games that we have seen, he's made the next save. And games in November aren't the games he's played in the last couple of years. And we saw what happens. Like, he had some really good games in the Stanley Cup final, and then he didn't. But then he made the next save in Game 7 when he had to make the next save, and that helped them win. And so for him right now, it's about making sure that he is sharp and that he doesn't have the amount of mileage on the tires that would cause him to drop in the playoffs. And that's been the whole Spencer Knight discussion, because the last couple of years, they've had arguably, or at least most timely, maybe the best backup goaltending in the league. And Stolarz last year was as good a backup as you could ever have, and he's playing still pretty well in Toronto. Alex Lyon did what he did, caught fire at just the right time. Chris Drieger, obviously, earlier in that time period of this run for the Panthers. And that's the Spencer Knight discussion. And that's the kind of focus that I have on Panthers goaltending this year. It's not that is Sergei Bobrovsky going to be fine. He'll probably be fine when it comes down to April and May when he needs to be. It's just a matter of, do they have to overuse him? And they're trying their best to not overuse him. And we haven't seen a huge pattern develop of when Spencer Knight's going to play. We thought for a while it was going to be 2 on, 1 off. Not quite like that this year. I think Spencer Knight's probably going to play the Chicago game. That would make sense. And he's going to play one of the Carolina games. We can tell when he's going to get into the lineup. But that's the most important story for me with goaltending. It's not Sergei Bobrovsky. We know what he is. He's still really good, and he still looks so sharp and so athletic for somebody at his age. It's a matter of making sure that the best Bobrovsky is still available in April and May. And while you love a shutout any time of the year, and it's great to have him in November, and it's great to have him against a team that isn't the Red Wings, who the Panthers completely have owned for, it feels like, a decade now. If this Bobrovsky shows up in April, it's much more important that it's showing up now. Absolutely. Though it's good to see that, obviously, from him, especially after he's had a couple of clunkers.
Yeah. And just we once again, we see that with the Panthers, and just once again, them being in the top third of shots against as far as like suppressing them. And just I just did the quick calculation from the last 2 postseasons. The difference between the shots allowed on Bobrovsky in the 2023 postseason versus 2024, 9 shots per game that the Panthers defense helped them with, as far as like helping them see pucks and just not allowing those second chance opportunities. And
I mean, not to interrupt, but we remember in that Boston series when he came in for Alex Lyon, he wasn't very good. Yeah. We all remember the crazy save at the end of Game 5 that allowed them to go to overtime, but he wasn't great in that series. Yeah, like the Game 7, it wasn't awesome. Game 6, he gave up 5, I think it was. You know, that was the back and forth ping pong game, and everybody remembers the ending. But it took until Toronto, Carolina when he got red hot. And and my Y Hockey co-host, who sometimes says incredibly smart things that you won't hear anywhere else, he said that 23 run was the Panthers playing to the spirit of the system rather than the actual system. Like, they played hockey the way they wanted to play it, but it wasn't actually getting the X's and O's down perfectly. It was just the spirit of it. And they willed their way to all of that success. And then last year, they really showed that. And we go back to the point we made at the top of the show, which is a culture can mean anything you want it to mean. And for the Panthers, the culture is the standards that they've set. And the Jets game was the best example of the standard in many ways this season, because you see a big game, they have a clunker of a performance against the Devils, and they respond by absolutely dominating a really good team. And they know they can reach those levels, and they have to push each other to reach those levels. And when they need to, they can do that. And you talk about the Panthers until they aren't. Like, that was what we used to say about them when they were terrible. It's the Panthers until they're not, because they showed you no evidence that they were ever going to be anything like this. And then over the last couple of years, and we saw it only very briefly in 23, it really first showed up in the playoffs, but then we saw it a lot last year. Like, the standard is the standard. And so somebody who I know very well was at the game on Thursday and was texting me in frustration about how they were playing. And I said, this is a clunker, fine, I get it. They didn't play very well. They look slow, all this. I said, it wouldn't matter if they had 5 of these in a row, although that would be concerning. It's not something that they usually do, but they're going to bounce back and play really well. And then they do this, they did against the Jets. And it's a reminder, like, they have a high standard that they set for themselves. And they don't even need to show it in the regular season. They're still showing it because they expect that of themselves. And they know you can't just automatically turn it on in April and in May. That's not possible. We've seen teams think they could do that and then miss the playoffs entirely. Teams that we just thought they're just going to flip the switch and that's the end of that. But this standard that they've set is really incredible. And I've said it about multiple different Panthers teams in recent years, which is, you shouldn't take what you're seeing for granted. And I know Panthers fans take nothing for granted because of everything they had seen leading up to these last 4 years. But I said that about the 21-22 team that blew everyone away with offense. You're never going to see an offense that good again. Then the Cup final run, and then last year. But, like, they really have set a standard that makes it so incredible how consistent they are when you look at other teams that can't find it. And you look at the Panthers, and they're not amazing. They're not doing what the Jets are doing. They're not doing Carolina. They're not surprising anyone. They're just being themselves. So when you listen to all the podcasts around the league, yours, the national shows, you don't really have to talk about the Panthers all that much because they're just doing what they're supposed to do. They are acting like the defending champions, and that's hard. I think we forget that last year Vegas had the best start for defending champion ever, then all the injuries, and they completely fall apart. And it is so hard to repeat in this league. And the standards that they have set feels like a culture that teams say they want to have, but very few actually have it. And this team has it. And the games like the Jets game shows you that the culture there is real and it comes to everybody. And even if they throw in a clunker in Winnipeg, like, you know they'll respond at some point with another big performance against whoever, and you'll go, yeah, no, they're fine. And I'll end it on this. I go back to the story I told last year when I'm watching the home opener against Toronto. Of course, you were there for that. And they were without Ekblad and Montour and Bennett. And the game against Toronto looked exactly like every single game in the playoffs did. And I either went on Twitter or I went on Why Hockey, and I said, thank you very much. I'll see you in April. I don't need to see anymore. They're going to be fine. And then after the first period against the Bruins in the season opener, I'm like, all right, we'll see you in April. They're going to be okay. Like, it's just that sign that you know they're fine. You know they have everything down what they need to be. And not that it isn't good to have more reinforcement of that, but to see it in, again, the Jets are a unique case because of Paul Maurice, but against one of those teams where they just remind them, yeah, we're the defending champions. You're having a nice start and all that, but these are the defending champions. And if you want to beat us, you have to beat us. And we know your voodoo probably isn't good enough right now. Like, that's very hard to do, and this team has found a way to do it the last couple of years, and that's what's most impressive. And that's why, even if they're not going to be considered among like the flashiest teams in the league, I still don't think there's a better team in the East than them right now. I don't. The Devils beat them twice, but I need to see them do that in the playoffs.
I agree.
In Carolina, they already did that to them. And the Rangers, they already did that to them. And the Capitals, they did that to them. You know, if you want to be the best team in the East, you have to do that against Florida on a consistent basis. And for now, not like it actually matters, because if you're the best team in the league in November, who cares? But I haven't seen a number of teams yet prove that they can do what they need to do to eliminate this team. And you saw how much it's taken out of the Bruins already this season.
Oh, yeah.
To get to that point. And you saw, like, that's what the Lightning did to them twice, and they learned from them. Another one of my favorite tropes is how the Panthers and Lightning have a very mutually beneficial, even if it's hate-filled relationship, because they make each other better in ways that they are constantly forcing each other to one-up. You know, it's a constant game of one-upsmanship. And they got that from Tampa. And until somebody proves that they can do it, like, you have to go into all of those situations by expecting the Florida Panthers to say, no, you're not ready yet. You know, the Oilers almost did it to them, but they still couldn't do it, you know? And it's moments like that. The Bruins games, the Rangers game was the real tell. Like, if the Bruins game wasn't enough for you, then the Rangers game without Barkov and MSG, where it looked like game one of the Eastern Conference Finals again, at that point, you just have to say, like, it doesn't matter if they have clunkers, because they can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then less pulling of the hair out when it comes to the chances against, and then just still with how the turnover, not a lot of it, they're still able to bring back that continuity when you think of defensive mindset when it comes to their lines with Barkov and Reinhart together, Lundell and Eetu-Luostarinen, and like we mentioned earlier, Mackie Samoskevich bringing that scoring punch to the fourth line. And in post 04-05 lockout, only two teams have missed the playoffs after winning the cup: the Carolina Hurricanes 2007, 2015 LA Kings, and the Panthers well on their way. And like you said, you've seen enough to see it in April, but hey, still a lot to cover in between now and then on how they continue to progress to get to April and to hopefully give themselves a chance to win another Stanley Cup. But Matt, I want to thank you so much for coming on and discussing all things Florida Panthers hockey after this 5-0 win for the Florida Panthers over the Winnipeg Jets. Tell everybody where they can find you and your work online.
You see the Twitter handle. I will not call it by what its name is right now. That's just not going to happen. More posting now at Blue Sky, which is the same name. So go find me at Blue Sky. Pucks and Palms podcast every Thursday. Me and Colby Guy, Why Hockey. We're making it up as we're going along. It's a little whose line is it anyway with that at the time. So we'll see that. There's also play-by-play in the future and other stuff. So all the links and profiles. Thank you very much for having me, Armando. And yeah, this is a fun team to talk about, even if at times it's kind of boring because it's how good they are.
Absolutely, and we'll try our best as we get through these next.
They'll give us something to talk about. They'll have a streak in which people will freak out, and Paul Maurice will tell them, "We're going to be fine, guys." They had it in March last year, and Paul Maurice said, "We're going to be fine," and he was right. Doesn't mean that there aren't going to be moments where people freak out. I think it's in the DNA of the Panthers fan to lose their minds a little bit, because it's so hard to shake everything you know from the past. It's deep-seated in your mind, and that's fine. No matter of Stanley Cup is going to take that away, and I understand that.
No doubt, and we are here to calm everything down if it comes to that. But Matt, thank you so much, and I will hopefully see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Armando.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Matt Lichtenstadter, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.